what would you be able to do to start this dialogue? Cartoons, obviously, not a great start apparently. So maybe a novel. Oh, Salman Rushdie tried that. We all know what happened. Maybe you could write an article. Oh, well, Rediker in Holland, in France, did that. Had to go into hiding, as have others elsewhere across the continent. So there's always this idea that that if you just stop that happening, then it'll be okay. And they don't realise that the people who go nuts today for the cartoon will go bananas tomorrow over the book, will go crazy a day later over the article, will go nutsoid and rampage in the streets when Allied power does something they don't like, and so on. You don't placate this. You've got to say, these are our values, and if you don't like them, you can hop it. But instead we say, in the famous words of Groucho Marx, these are our values, and if you don't like them, we've got others.
What radical Muslims try to do is to make us fear our freedom of speech, and the response should not be to condemn the people who use the freedom of speech, but to show everybody should have shown the cartoons all over the world, every network station, every museum, every newspaper, so that the people who want to use violence instead of democratic means to attack the people who use freedom of speech know that it's without use to use violence, because the reaction will only be that more people use it. And because we don't, because our political elite are really cowards, because most of the media are politically correct cowards as well, who are afraid, who even condemn the people who use freedom of speech, the Muslims, the radical Muslims know and that it's very effective to threaten or to use terroristic means, which of course we should never give in to.
Most people wouldn't know who you were saying if you said Molly Norris. In America, let alone in Britain or somewhere. And I think that in itself is unbelievably sinister.
Molly Norris was, of course, reacting to the cartoon South Park on TV, which was supposedly fearless.
The double standards are amazing. I mean, you can do anything to Christians. You can do anything to the representation of Jesus. Now, I understand that in Islam, Muhammad occupies a unique position and is sort of, not supposed to depict him. Well, good for you guys, but you know what? Christians find, desecration of Jesus quite upsetting too.
The South Park episode was interesting to me because, in a sense, it was a joke on the cowardice of our contemporary media.
They had Muhammad behind a bear suit, in a bear suit, and when it aired, they actually had a black box in front that they wouldn't show it. They wouldn't even, I think, say the word Muhammad.
In a sense, they were saying it might be Muhammad in here, or it might not be Muhammad in here, and so it's a joke on our nervousness about showing Muhammad. And so even a joke about not wanting to show Muhammad becomes a joke that can't be shown.
There's one group in society you can't do this about. And you can't do it for two reasons. One is that they might try and kill you afterwards. They might come for you. So plenty of people are, I suppose, fairly reasonably reticent about doing it. But the other one is that there is this army of cultural scolds in the left-wing media who will accuse you of being Islamophobic if you do.
Draw Muhammad in any way, even if it's a heroic image of Muhammad, even if it's a blank paper with a dot and you say that's Muhammad, that's enough.
That underscored, here again, that the West will bow to violent bullying, and Molly Norris saw this and thought that it was terrible, and that's why she conceived Everybody Draw Muhammad Day in the first place.
And she was right in thinking, well, if everybody draws Muhammad, they can't kill everybody. And she's exactly right.
May 20th, 2010, I believe she did it. And she worked for the Seattle Times, I think a staff artist, a staff cartoonist. And instantly, she got death threats.
This could happen to anyone, as it were, if they strayed into this area. I mean, as far as I know, Molly Norris can't have imagined what she was treading into.
FBI advises her that she has to leave her job, she has to leave her home.
She just thought it was a kind of censorship of liberals issue. wanted to show solidarity. And so she said, oh, let's have everybody draw Muhammad. And she had no idea of what was about to descend on her.
Imagine if a cartoonist or a liberal journalist or activist had said something about the Pope and was driven basically into hiding for that. It would be endless news. There would be endless causes. There would be Mali's law.
You know, in a certain sense, Ezra Levant, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Pamela Geller, all of us, to one degree or another, have understood what happens when you take an interest in these issues. Molly Norris didn't have a great deal of interest in this issue. She just came at it. She's like someone who'd just been sleeping in a cave for 40 years and thought the free speech issues were exactly the same as they were at Berkeley in the 60s, and she sort of woke up from a long hibernation and wandered into it.
She basically apologized quickly, and the FBI contacted her, and basically she disappeared off the face of the earth. We don't know her name now. She has a different name, so she ran.
She's gone. She's ceased to exist. She's ceased to exist.
There's somebody who is no offense to Molly Norris, but basically, not a very high-profile figure, just a local paper cartoonist, can basically be disappeared as a person, become a non-person, having trodden into this area, should be profoundly disturbing to a wider public.
It's very, very sad that that's where we are now, that we have to enter into witness protection programs in order to take part in a national or international debate.
The left just abandon you. And there's no more colder way of expressing that abandonment than when her own editors simply said, you may have noticed there's no Molly Norris cartoon in this week's paper. That's because, quote, there is no more Molly, unquote. That's how they eliminated her public identity.
That there is, as in the famous line, that there is no more Molly Norris. People should realise that's not just about Molly Norris. This is about them.
I mean, if Hollywood, if strong institutions like South Park and the channel that publishes it, strong institutions like millionaire bodyguarded Hollywood celebrities at the Oscars, if they don't have the courage to do it, how could some nobody like Molly do it?
To be solidar with her, to stand by her. We actually need to do that.
You might be on Facebook after breakfast, you might send out a tweet, and by the time your plane lands, or by the time you look at your phone next, you discover, you've been the source of an international incident. And so cases like the Molly Norris case sort of have that terrible further dampening effect. It could be you. It could be you without you really realizing what you're wading into.
And the President of the United States, a man who defends covered women, the right of women to go covered, won't defend the right of an American woman to go uncovered, to live her life, to leave the safe house, to walk the streets. President Obama never said a word about her. An American woman, an American citizen, has her life vaporized. And the President of the United States won't say a word about it. It's astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing to me. I don't understand how people cannot be outraged, and I don't understand how the left can actually allow one of its own to be consumed like this. But she learned the hard way that when these things go down, the left is not there for you.
Charlie Hebdo was an incredibly offensive magazine, and in the greatest sort of tradition of satire.
And we have a prize for freedom of speech, and we gave that to Charlie Hebdo the year before. And so I met with them, and I was kind of involvement. So when it happened, it struck me in a more personal way.
This was a group of people who were doing cutting-edge, zeitgeisty cartoons and articles, and actually had to move their offices one time previously because of them being firebombed in response to them publishing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. It wasn't until after they had moved their offices they were attacked a second time by two Muslim brothers who had decided to take Islamic blasphemy laws into their own hands.
It also changed my life directly, because just a few hours after the story that began in Paris, the security took me from my home and put me in the secret hiding. And that's been the life since then.
And I don't use the word offensive very often because I spend my whole life trying to upset people. But it is, to my sensibilities, so deeply and profoundly and genuinely offensive that we should be even suggesting censoring art, censoring people's right to write what they want and to draw cartoons.
This is what happens when you don't have a culture of intellectual or artistic inquiry. Just after 9/11, somewhere in, I forget where it was now, Cleveland or Chicago or somewhere, they were putting on a play about Israel and Palestine. It was all totally pro-Palestinian. It was an anti-Israeli play. There was an Israeli teenager and a Palestinian teenager, and the play was all on the side of the Palestinian teenager. And the Muslim community group still shut it down anyway, because the point wasn't that the Muslim girl wins the argument over the hated Jew girl. It's not about doing a pro-Muslim play versus a pro-Jewish play. It's about the fact that this stuff is beyond discussion. So we don't want any play about it, which is why, if you've ever been, in Riyadh on a Saturday night, there's not a lot of great theatre options.
And they're attacked from two angles. I mean, from, of course, the terrorists themselves, which is a danger, but also from the political correctness, because they have pointed out you're not a good human being, you're a bad guy. So I mean, you have a pressure from both sides there.
Because somebody somewhere gets offended. Somebody somewhere claims that one of their religious figures has been so gravely ridiculed that the appropriate response to that is a mass shooting.
Charlie Hebdo, 13 human beings were massacred, slaughtered. For what? For drawing something that somehow the culture told them is forbidden.
Not being able to depict Muhammad is not something that has always been there. There are mosques in the Middle East that do have, or did have, depictions of Muhammad.
It's another declaration of the supremacy of Islam and Muslims over non-Muslims, that non-Muslims must not draw Muhammad, even if Muslims have done it themselves.
So this is just exercising power over us. They are telling us, you cannot draw our prophet.
The tragic element of what's happened is you have had snarlingly inarticulate bozos wiping out articulate, sophisticated people. That's what happened in the offices of Charlie Hebdo. Complete, bloody, inarticulate morons who can't win an argument have to shoot you because they come from a stunted society, too stupid to enable them to make their case.
I was asked the Islamists back when they thought I was coming to elections. They say that Islam is backward.
Tail wagging and another judgment for time. The book ultra-liberal, left-wing, gay arguments, and in a way they're ultimately marriage in coal mine.
My answer was, take the Human Development Report just published by the United Nations, this is in 2018, and they take these three standards: freedom, women's rights, and I forget the third one, I think it was maybe, free government. But there were these three deficits, and I said, measured by these standards, by these human rights published by the United Nations, then yes, Islam is backward. So I was, choosing my words very, very carefully. but regardless of that, again, it really doesn't matter. You can talk like Theo van Gogh, or you can talk like the Pope. It really doesn't matter. If you reflect on anything in Islamic law, Islamic political philosophy, you object to Sharia law. If you object to Sharia law, it doesn't matter how politely you do it. It doesn't matter the language you use. You are our friend.
And again, it gets to Ayaan Hirsi Ali's line about sharing the risk. When you share the risk, you make everybody safer. When the risk is borne by a few people, you make them all less safe. And in the case of Charlie Hebdo, in fact, you make them dead. Because at a certain level, the cowardice of the rest of the media is why Charlie Hebdo had to bear that risk alone and why they're dead.
And the people that were murdered there on that day, including the editor of the magazine, Job, was somebody who was at the cutting edge of saying, there is nothing that we can't talk about. There should be nothing that we can't satirize. Why in the 21st century do we feel beholden to any ideology or any system of either government or religion that it can tell us what we can and can't say? And I'm afraid to say it cost him his life when the two brothers decided to open fire in that office and say to these guys, we are going to kill you because of what you have done to our prophet. There are many people, obviously, including his protection officers that he had been given in the past, and all of his staff around him that had to die for what they believed in. But, he was famed for having said, I'd rather die standing than live on my knees. And I think the people that are willing to express not just satirical concerns, but real-world concerns about Islam, about all sorts of injustices all around the world, are living Sharp's legacy.
You have to fight for it. You have to exercise the free speech. You don't just, believe it is. It's like, okay, those people who said, Je suis Charlie, holding signs up, that means nothing. Holding a pen up means nothing.
We Are Charlie was organized by the government, who is part of the problem.
Where innocent people are killed in the name of Muhammad and Allah, they go to find the first camera and say Islam is a religion of peace. It's crazy. Almost reflex of political correctness.
Co-opted into by the French government, by people in the elite classes all around the world, was a sort of statement to say we don't believe in offending one another, a complete diametric opposite of what Charlie Hebdo stood for. They didn't care about offense, they cared about the message that was getting through it.
So it was a wrong thing. Lots of people were very opposed to this movement We Are Charlie, because in fact it was recuperated by the government to protect the Muslims, because they brought also the Muslims into it. But it looks like if the Muslims were threatened, well, in fact, it was the free speech.
There is a movement trying to kill us, and you are sanctioning this movement by pretending it's not trying to kill us.
And I was raised in a Muslim family. How offensive is it to say that Muslims are somehow more genetically predisposed to violence, more snowflakey? What is it? What is this actual racism or actual bigotry that the left hurls at Muslims to say you can't handle criticism, so we're going to wrap you up in bubble wrap and defend you for you?
The media does not respect Islam. The media, especially on their core issues of the role of women, the place of women, treatment of women, things like that, the media does not respect Islam. The media is afraid of Islam. It's a very different thing.
And you saw that in the reaction to what happened after the Charlie Hebdo murders. Even people amongst Western Muslims, even people who didn't think they should have been left in a big pool of blood on the floor, still didn't think they had the right to publish those cartoons.
And the anti-censorship group was going to honor them, and a significant number of writers in the West actually protested that Penn was going to honor the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists because they were saying it's offensive to Muslims that they drew Muhammad and you have to stop this.
Gary Trudeau, the cartoonist, Doonesbury, I think that's his cartoon, where he basically smeared Charlie Hebdo. And I think that the terms he used was they're punching down. They're not enlightening the culture. It has no societal value what they did. And that's just BS. Truth is a value. Opposing tyranny is a value. And he can't see that. Why? Because he's a leftist who wants to impose his own form of tyranny.
And je suis as a phrase has now been co-opted into all sorts of different things. You see, je suis Muslim, je suis, Ariana Grande.
One of the few people who actually supports Charlie Hebdo, in practical terms, everyone else says, "Oh, these are courageous, free speech. Can I have my Je suis Charlie pen? I'm going to the Golden Globes with Helen Mirren, and she's got a big brooch on her fabulous embonpoint." And I'd like to have a Je suis Charlie badge too. Can I have one? Oh yeah. Well, this Je suis Charlie thing you're all wearing the badges for. Can we have a look at what? They're so courageous. They're such heroes. Can we have a look at what makes them so heroic and so courageous? No, we're not gonna show you that. Let's go to commercial. We can't do that. We can't do that. Pamela Geller is actually one of the few people who actually said, "Yeah, I'm like all 7 billion people on the planet, je suis Charlie, but je suis one of the few people who's actually going to show you what Charlie were doing."
In the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attack, where an entire editorial staff was targeted and many assassinated, American Muslim leaders, 3 days after, held a conference. Now, one would think, what an extraordinary time for American Muslims in the West to stand for the First Amendment and to show that we as a people, American people, stand for freedom of speech. No. 3 days after Charlie Hebdo, American Muslim leaders in Texas held a Stand with the Prophet conference in Garland. And it was a conference to stand with the Prophet in defense of Islamic blasphemy laws, in defense of the Sharia, against Islamophobia. What is Islamophobia but opposition to jihad and Sharia? They held a conference essentially in defense of the ideology behind that mass slaughter.
We stand with the killers of the cartoonists and in favor of Islamic blasphemy laws being violently enforced upon non-Muslims.
And so, at that conference, we held a peaceful protest in defense of freedom. Protesting a conference, standing with the Sharia behind the slaughter of cartoonists, reporters, and journalists. We had a very well-attended conference. There should have been millions of Americans there. But again, they wouldn't know about it because the media is not discussing this in a candid and honest way.
That time, we learned that the Garland venue was a public venue that anybody could rent for events.
Subsequent to that, I said, okay, we're going to do a conference in that same room, in that same center, the Colwell Center, in defense of freedom of speech.
In Islamic history, actually Muslims have depicted Muhammad, and there are hagiographical images of Muhammad that are in Islamic tradition. We had some of them on display, some historical images from the West as well, of Muhammad in the church in Florence, where he's depicted in hell as per Dante's Inferno.
To show that people weren't always being killed, that now, if you dare depict Muhammad, you will be targeted for death. It is a violent means of warfare in order to impose Sharia law.
Is the difference between Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Islamic Republic of Iran or other Islamic countries in the Middle East and the West. At least this is how it should be. At least this is how still America still has. And in Europe we are already almost lost when it comes to also freedom of speech, but in America, with your First Amendment, this is about freedom of speech, and we should. I mean, it was not done to provoke Muslims. It was done, like I said before, to make a point that freedom of speech is our heritage, is our most sacred right.
I also, as an afterthought, said any artist who wants to submit a drawing, a cartoon, a painting of Muhammad, we will have a contest to award the winner. So that's how Garland evolved. Geert Wilders is the leader of the Dutch political party, the Freedom Party, and he and I share very similar views on Sharia, on jihad terrorism.
I know that he's the most honest politician on earth about Islam. He doesn't bite his tongue at all. He doesn't play games with it.
Hello, America!
He's a peaceful Democrat. He has strong opinions about Islam, but he's a peaceful liberal Democrat. He's not a violent bone in his body. He distinguishes between individual Muslim people versus the ideology, the doctrine, the philosophy, the religion of Islam. And I think that's an important distinction to make. You can oppose an ideology and still be respectful and even loving of individual people.
Pamela took the initiative for Garland, Texas, at the same location where not so long after the Charlie Hebdo assassinations, Muslims gathered, and I believe it was even the same venue, decided that Muhammad cartoons should be outlawed, should be forbidden. And Pamela said, well, I'm all about freedom of speech, and I applaud her for that. And so we should have a Muhammad cartoon contest at the same place.
And of course it's ironic that the winner of the AFDR Garland Muhammad art contest would be a former Muslim.
Bosch Fawston gave a very moving and affecting talk about his upbringing as a Muslim and how he learned, even in a relatively secular Muslim household, he was sort of in the air to hate Jews, to hate women, to have this vicious anti-Semitism.
That's even being raised in a relatively moderate secular household in America with Muslims, but the misogyny was a given. It was immoderate, the misogyny, not moderate at all. Almost every female in my family was beaten up by her spouse, and brothers, and father, of course, and the admiration for Hitler, and the Jew hatred. It was immoderate. It was nothing moderate about the Jew hatred. Jews were the scum of the earth, and that's what we were taught, again and again and again. And I also give them a prayer scar, which is something that Muslims who are really trying to show off the fact that they really pray hard. They pray physically hard, to the point where they put their heads into the carpet and they grow an actual scar.
Because we always try to have fun with these things and remember that we're fighting for the right and for good, for truth, for justice, for the American way. And so we had a big check, like the Publishers Clearinghouse, for $12,000 that we presented to Bosch, and a real one as well.
And I drew him the sword. I said, wait a minute, how about if I have him threatening me to say I can't draw him, and me simply saying, well, that's why I draw you. That's the only reason why I draw Muhammad, because he says I can't, because Islam says I can't, because Muslims say I can't. Again, as I put it often, I never set out to draw Muhammad until we were told that we quote unquote can't.